Okay, Parshas Devarim, page 938. Page 938. Now, Parshas Devarim, first of all, the whole Sefer Devarim, I told you, is called Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy it's the English word is Deuteronomy, which means, the root of the word is deuce. Deuteronomy is deuce. It comes from the word deuce, which is two, because Sefer Devarim is called Mishnah Torah. Mishnah means repeating the Torah, because we're going to find a lot of laws that Moshe Rabbeinu then reviews the history of the Jewish people, reviews many of the laws. That's the background of Sefer Devarim. Now, the problem in Parshas Devarim in particular is Parshas Devarim is extremely cryptic. So we're going to have to go through many of the Rashis here, because Parshas Devarim, a lot of what Moshe Rabbeinu begins with over here is going to be, without looking at Rashi, you can't begin to understand what's happening over here. Okay, so let's take a look first. This is what Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Bnei Israel, Bamidbar ba'arova mol suf, in the desert, in the Arava, opposite Suf, Bein Paran uvein Tofel, V'Lavan v'Chatzeros v'Dizahav. Take a look at Rashi. Eila hadvarim. Says Rashi, Levi she'en divrei tochachos, since these are words of rebuke, Umana kan kol ha'mekomos she'ichisu lifnei ha'makom. The Torah over here enumerates the various places where they provoked HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lefichach sosam es hadvarim, he was very ambiguous about it. V'hizkiran beremes, he only mentions it and he alludes to these things. Mipnei kvodon shel Yisrael. That means Moshe Rabbeinu, in rebuking the Jewish people, does not come out and say it openly. He talks about, it would be like a guy who committed a crime and he robbed the bank on Maple Street. And so it would talk. I'd like to, Mike, I'd like to speak to you about Maple Street. You understand what I'm getting at? And I didn't say openly about robbing a bank. I'm going to rebuke you for it, but I don't want you. The rebuke should be kind of a little bit more subtle. Now, one of the reasons Moshe Rabbeinu does that, according to some of the Meforshim, is Moshe Rabbeinu wants to see the reaction. If I say, hey, Mike, I want to talk to you about Maple Street, and you go, like that, I'm going to drop the subject. You're not ready to listen, and you're not going to accept what I have to say. If you kind of nod your head like that, like, oh, I know where you're going with this one. All right, yeah, I guess we got to talk it over. Then you're more receptive. And I could say, so Moshe Rabbeinu wants to gauge the reaction of the Jewish people over here. That's the first thing. Now, if you'll notice, this is on Rosh Chodesh Adar. Rosh Chodesh, Shvat. This is Rosh Chodesh Shvat. And Moshe Rabbeinu dies on the 7th day of Adar. So he's actually giving them, this is the 40th year, and what he's saying to them is actually 36 days before he dies. He starts to rebuke 36 days before he dies, and that's the word Eila. Eila, the numerical value of the first word in the Parsha, Eila is 36. Eila Hadvarim is 36 days before he dies. And then the Rashi says, where is it? In Pasuk Gimel. So I'll skip the Pasuk Gimel. Let's read it inside. We're going to come back to this, but let's read it inside. Ad Kadesh Banea. There were 11 days journey from Chorev, which is Har Sinai. Vayhi ba'arboim shana be'ashtei asar chodesh, bechad lachodesh, in the 40th year, the 11th month, on the first day of the month, which is the first day of Shvat, Diber Moshe el b'nei Yisrael kechol asher tziva Hashem oso aleya. Moshe spoke to b'nei Yisrael as all that Hashem commanded him. Now look at Rashi and Pasuk Gimel. We're going to go back to Rashi and Pasuk Aleph in a second. But Rashi and Pasuk Gimel is the left column, about 7 lines from the bottom. This teaches. Everybody, if you find it, please show the person next to you. This teaches Moshe Rabbeinu rebuked them close to his death. Where did Moshe Rabbeinu learn this from? Mi Yaakov. Shelo hochiach es banav ela samach lemisa. He only rebuked them close to death. Omar Ruvain b'ni ani omer lecha mipnei laho chachlicha kol hashanim halalu. Ruvain, why did I not rebuke you all these years? Kidei shelo tanicheni v'selech v'sidbak beisav ochi. So you shouldn't go forsake me and go join up with Esav. So he waits until before he dies. Before he dies, then he'll rebuke him. He's not going to abandon him at that point, and nobody to abandon. But if Yaakov would have given you Reuven the rebuke earlier, so then Reuven could abandon Yaakov and he could go join up with Esav. But then Rashi says like this: arba dvarim ein mochichin es adam el samach lemisa. There are 4 reasons you don't rebuke a person until close to death. Kidei shelo yeh mochiach v'chozer u'mochiach. You shouldn't rebuke him and then go back and rebuke him again. V'shelo yeh chaveiro ro'eo misba'ishvan. That your fellow should not see you and be embarrassed in front of you. I mean, once you rebuke somebody, every time he sees you, every time you see him, say he may become very embarrassed. So you don't rebuke somebody and repeat it, which people are in the habit of doing. Your parents sometimes, guilty as charged. You see your kid, I told you not to do that. I told you I wish you would. And then you see the kid later in the day. Yeah, you know what? You still got, once is enough. And number 2, Rashi brings down 2 of the 4 reasons over here. It said, if the guy doesn't see you, if the guy sees you, he's going to be very, very embarrassed because, you look you in the face. You're the guy who rebuked him. So it's a skill. To rebuke a person is a skill, and it's a difficult skill, and most people don't have this skill. The Gemara says, nowadays, now that we're time of the Gemara says, nowadays, we don't know how to give tochacha, we don't know how to give rebuke, or we don't know how to receive rebuke. If you say to somebody, take that splinter out from between your teeth, they'll say to you, take that crossbeam out from between your eyes. I mean, most of the time when you rebuke somebody, they'll turn around and say to you, well, you're not perfect either. People get very defensive when they're rebuked. There was actually have you ever heard of Rav Volbe? Rav Shlomo Volbe was one of the biggest mashgichim in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Shlomo, he wrote, there's a sefer called Alei Shor, a classic, it's a classic in the yeshiva world by Rav Volbe. Rav Volbe was considered the top mashgiach in Eretz Yisrael. So a bacher in the yeshiva once came to Rav Volbe. He was a Rebbe, he was a mashgiach in Ber Yaakov. And a bacher once came up to Rav Volbe and he said to him, I'd like to have a meeting with you once a month and you could point out my flaws. Tell me my flaws. So Rav Volbe looked at those bacher. He said, you don't want me to point out your flaws. You just want to be able to tell people that you have a private meeting with me once a month. So the bacher was absolutely destroyed. And he avoided Rav Volbe for the next couple months in the yeshiva. Every time he saw Rav Volbe, he went the other direction. So one day he's walking down the hall and he gets a tap on the shoulder and it's Rav Volbe. And Rav Volbe looks at him and he says, Shlomo, where have you been? I thought you wanted to have a monthly meeting. He says, Rebbe, I couldn't face you. I mean, after what he said, I don't understand. You asked me to point out your flaws. I was just pointing out your flaws. What's the problem? It gets kind of rough in the trenches. So to take, and it was making a point, clearly making a point. You gotta be a Rav Volbe to make a point like that. But a person has to know that the Torah says that's why Moshe Rabbeinu wait until he waits. Now, sometimes in life you can't wait until you're going to die. Sometimes you have to correct people. You have a responsibility to raise your family. The only thing is that we always tell parents, how many times a day did you criticize your child? And how many times a day did you compliment or encourage your child? The Gemara says, when it comes to children, a wife, and the Yetzer Hara, small doche, v'yamin mekareves. The left hand pushes away, and the right hand draws near. Now, what's the significance of left and right? That's already Kabbalistic. But what is the significance for most people, unless you're a lefty? The dominant hand. That means you push away with the left hand, and you draw near with the right hand, which tells you that the drawing near should be stronger than the pushing away. I have a friend who's a very good, very, very strong mechanech, and his kid got in trouble in school. The kid did something. The Rebbe gave the kid a hard time. So the father called the Rebbe, and he said, I see you've got the left hand which pushes away. Now, do you also have the right hand that draws near? I once called when my first son was in yeshiva. So my first son was in yeshiva, and he went to Yeshiva Gdola. He's 16 years old. So I called the meshgiach of the yeshiva. I said, how's my son doing? He said, he's okay, whatever he said. Okay, I called him a week later. I said, how's my son doing? He said, yeah, I spoke to you last week. Yeah, he's fine. I said, why did you call? I said, listen, if I had invested money with you, I'd be calling every day. I've invested something worth a little bit more than money with you. So you're going to be hearing from me. So he said to me, I understand. And and by the way, for parents, it's extremely important. One of the most important things is stay in contact. I once did a survey of teachers, of Torah teachers, teachers school with kids, and I asked them, if parents call you to find out about the kid, do you relate to the kid differently? 23 out of 25 said yes. One said no, one said I'm not sure, probably not. He said, I don't know. 23 out of 25 said, yes, I relate to the kid differently. And it's natural because if the parent cares about the kid, I care about the kid. Parent doesn't care about the kid. Parent sees me at a wedding and says, how's my son doing? Now, if it was so important to you, you wouldn't wait till you happen to run into me at a wedding. Call me up, find out. You stay on top of them. The teacher relates differently. Yeah.
So, like when you talked about pushing away your children, wife, with your left, bringing closer to your right, you also included the Yetzer Hara in that?
Yeah.
What's the significance?
The significance is that you push away the Yetzer Hara but there are certain times where you have to make use of the Yetzer Hara. Any pleasurable experience is Yetzer Hara. Like eating cholt on Shabbos, right? Or eating, that sort of thing. Or living with your wife. That's all Yetzer Hara. That's called Yetzer Hara. But there are certain times it has to be drawn near. Certain times it has to be pushed away. But there's a different idea here that Reb Simcha Wasserman said, which is a phenomenal idea. You see, when you push with unequal pressure, what happens if you push with unequal pressure? If I push this with unequal pressure, notice what happens to it. It starts to turn. It turns because I'm putting more pressure here than here. And Rav Simcha Wasserman said that what the Gemara is telling you is we want to change people. We want to move people in a certain direction. The way you do what the Gemara is telling you is in order to move them in a direction, we're talking about moving in a direction, not just pushing away and drawing near. There's actually, in order to change people, which is one of the hardest things in the world is to change people. Very difficult to change people. And most of the times you channel them, you don't change them. Rabbi Bredowitz, I once heard him tell a story, a documented incident. There was a town in Europe. Who did he say it was? Not Rosh Shlomo Kluger, I forgot who he said it was. One of the Gedolim from the 15th or 16th century. And what happened was there was a couple was married. And the wife was on her deathbed. So the husband made a shvuah, which often happens, by the way. This is not an uncommon situation. The husband made a neder or a shvuah that after she dies, he's not going to marry anybody else, pledging his loyalty to her on her deathbed. Okay, she died. And then somebody suggested a shidduch for him. And so he went to, I forgot who it was. I got to look up one of the Gedolim at the time. I forgot who it was. And he told him that he bound himself by a shvuah, and this gadol then researched the story and researched the situation, and he said it's permissible for him. There's certain halachic leniencies, and he invoked however you annul a shvuah, and he said you could marry her. That the shvuah that he made to his wife, the oath that he made to his wife, is not binding. And he said that based on that, you're allowed to marry her. So he marries this woman. In a short time after he marries this woman, he himself got sick, and then he died. And the woman felt that the reason that he died is because she came to this big Rav, and she had complained. She said the reason he died is because you allowed him to get out of that original thing that was obviously not the right thing to do, and that's why he died. So Bredowitz said this in public, and I've asked him about this several times. This is documented. So he wrote a tshuva. He researched the story again. He went to the cemetery, and he wrote a tshuva. And he wrote it out on a paper, and he put it into the grave. The husband came back to life. and the two of them got married. Now, I don't know if they had to do a chuppah kedusha. And again, I don't know if they have to redo the marriage. That's already a halachic shaila. Is she considered a widow? Okay, so they got remarried. But after they remarried, she came back with another complaint. She said, I don't love him anymore. Something changed when he died. I loved him in the beginning, and now I don't love him anymore. So he davened. And again, he davened, researched the story. He researched the story, and he davened that she should have a change of heart. And sure enough, she had a change of heart, and the two of them lived happily ever after. That's the story. The elders of the town, they used to keep records, town elders. The elders of the town wrote in the journal, the town journal, they wrote, the second miracle was bigger than the first miracle because it's easier to bring somebody back to life than it is to change a heart. So I got to find out again who I have on record at home who it was. I forgot the name of the Rav who did it, but it's documented. It's documented. It's on the records. It's on the journal of this town. Be it as it may, and however much of it you believe or you don't believe, the point is to change somebody is very difficult, and therefore there's the yamin is makariv, the small is docha. Now let's go back to the first Rashi. First Rashi in the Parsha. Eile advarim. Okay, third line. El Kol Yisrael. He rebukes the entire Jewish people. Says Rashi, Ilu hochiach miksason. Everybody see that? Right column, third line. Had he rebuked only a few of them, Hayu elu shebashuk omrim, the ones who were out in the marketplace, they would have said, Atema yisem shomi mi ben amram v'lo ashivosem dover mikach v'kach. You heard what he said and he didn't respond. Ilu hayinu shamayinu mashivat ovdev. If we were there, we would have responded. Lekach kansam kulam. He got them all together. V'amar lahem harei kulchem kaim. You're all here. Kol mi sheyesh lo tshuva yoshiv. Anybody who's got a response, let him speak. Now Rashi explains what's Bamidbar. He rebuked them in the desert. Says Rashi, 1 second. Lo Bamidbar hayu. They weren't in the Midbar right now. Ela ba'arvos Moav. They were on the edges of Moab. Umahu b'midbar. Ela bishvil ma shehichisu b'midbar. He was talking about how they provoked him in the Midbar. That's the illusion. It says they were in the Midbar. He's talking about what they said in the Midbar, which was she'amru mi yitein musenu b'midbar, where they said, better we should die in the desert than go into Eretz Yisrael and get stomped after the spies came back. Ba'arava. What was in the Arava? Bishvil Arava shechatu beval peor. Bishitim ba'arvos Moav. What they did over there in the Arava with the daughters with the Benos Midyan, where they caused them to sin. Mol Suf, Mashi Hebrew B'Yam Suf, B'Voam L'Yam Suf. That was opposite Suf is what they did at the Yam Suf. That they started complaining about that they could have been buried in Egypt. Now they're going to die in the desert. And so on and so forth. Rashi goes on over here with all the various, each one of these places alludes to something, the Egel and Korach's rebellion and the spies, everything that they did, Rashi alludes to over here. Now, there is an interesting idea here. If, there's a group of people, and some of you have done something. I'm sure that you were in school. I'm sure in school at a certain point, this you drive me nuts, where there's collective punishment. One kid talked, he said, we are not going, the bell rang, we're not leaving until everybody is quiet and sitting at their desk. I hated that. Why am I at fault? Because this guy can't control himself. But that's how teachers dealt, right? And it's not fair. Now what happens, my younger brother actually once got in trouble. My younger brother, he got in trouble because they were on a class outing. And he went to the bathroom. In the meantime, the other kids were all goofing around. So by the time he came back, the teacher gave the entire group a punishment. So my brother said, why should I be punished? I wasn't even here when they did it. I don't know what they did something with it. He said, why should I be punished? He's like, you're part of the group. So my brother called him a baboon. Yeah, I don't know why he called him specifically a baboon, but that was one of those meetings that my parents had to go down. My brother was into animals. That was the best thing he came up with. He called him a baboon, so my parents had to go down and meet with the teacher, that sort of thing. But he wasn't right for calling him a baboon, that he shouldn't have done. But he was right that why am I being punished? I don't want to be rebuked. Let's say some of you have done something, or let's say some of you tend to talk during davening, and some of you don't. And I say, you know what, you guys, you ought to stop talking during davening. The guys who are talking, who don't talk, I'd be offended. I don't talk during davening. What do you, you're no better than I am. I don't talk during davening. You don't talk during, why do you, it's not my fault that some of these guys talk during davening. You understand? You take it very, now, the commentators ask over here, Moshe spoke to the entire Jewish people. Well, where is there a sin that the entire Jewish people did? Why are you rebuking the entire Jews? I wasn't involved in if I'm from Yeshivat Levi, I wasn't involved in the Chet of the Egel. And they weren't involved in the rebellion of Korach. Why are we getting blamed for that? Why, you understand the problem over here? Why are you rebuking me for something I wasn't involved with? So some did and some didn't. And sometimes you could protest and sometimes you can't protest. That teachers, and I've had it out with teachers where they punished one of my kids got punished, and he wasn't even around when something happened. And I said to him, "What do you want from the kid?" He said, "They're all part of a group." I said, "Yeah, but he has no control. You can't control the group. How do you expect the kid in the class to control the group?" He said, "Well, he laughed. He didn't laugh. He didn't even laugh. What are you assuming that he laughed? He didn't laugh. Why are you punishing? It's patently unfair." I had once one of my kids. One of my kid came home from school, so he was upset. I came home, they used to come home for lunch. So I come home, and my wife says to me, Plony's upset. Talk to him. I said, what are you upset about? He said, we're not getting recess in the afternoon. They said, there's no recess in the afternoon. I said, why not? He says, because two of the kids were playing with a ball, and two of the other kids punctured the ball. So the Rebbe said, the principal came in, and he said, until I find out who did it, nobody gets recess here. I said, did you do it? He goes, no. I said, were you involved? He goes, no, we were on the other side of the building playing marbles or something like that. And they tell me the truth. It's clear he could tell you the truth. I said, does he want you to snitch? I said, do you know who did it? He said, yeah. I said, does the principal want you to then tattle on who did it? He said, no. He said, we can't have tattling in the school. So I said, okay. And I called the principal. I said, why is my son being punished? He said, because this is such and such happened. I said, do you want him to tattle? He goes, no, we can't have that. I said, if he could have stopped the kids physically, would he have been allowed to use physical force? He says, no, chas v'shalom, can't have that sort of thing in the school. I said, in other words, there's absolutely nothing he could have done about it, and he's being punished. Why is he being punished? Silence on the other end of the phone. I tell him to talk to me when he comes back to school. So by the time he got back, the end of the story was the principal found out and everybody lived happily ever after. But it's patently unfair. So I've had a teacher once argue, he said to me, yeah, so what am I supposed to do? I said, I don't know what you're supposed to do. You're the teacher. But a bad solution isn't better than no solution. Well, you have no solution, therefore you should punish the innocent? So he said to me, they're all part of a group. They have to learn responsibility. So I said, I got a great idea. You know what? Every time a teacher in the school comes late, all the teachers should have their pay docked. Because after all, you're all part of a group. You're all teachers in the same school. No, that he didn't like. No, only children should be responsible for each other. Adults, no, chas v'shalom, no, not the adults. That he didn't like. So how could Moshe Rabbeinu rebuke the entire Jewish people? Listen to this phenomenal idea. The Gemara says, Avi, I'll get to you 1 second. Oh, I thought I got to you a question. The Gemara says like this. Rubam begezel. Gemara says, most people are guilty of theft. Did you ever rob a bank? No. Did you ever shoplift? No. But, maybe you left the light on in your room and it's really yeshiva property and now they have to pay the bill and it was carelessly left on. Or maybe you used a little too many towels, or maybe you were in a store and you touched a product and you kind of you touched a box of wafers in your finger, a bag of wafer, and your finger dented it a little bit. You just quickly put it back on the shelf. Or maybe you took advantage of some sale over there. Rubam begezel. Most people have stolen at some point or other. My wife is still nervous because when she was about 9, she shoplifted a rubber ball and she's worried they're going to come for her. So she's still nervous about that. Rubam begezel. Umiyut be'arayas. A minority of people are guilty of extreme sins of immorality. But everybody is guilty of Lashon Hara. So the Gemara says, everyone's guilty of the Lashon Hara? There are people who don't talk any Lashon Hara. So Gemara says, not actual Lashon Hara, avak Lashon Hara. What's avak Lashon Hara? Avak Lashon Hara means the dust of Lashon Hara. The dust of Lashon Hara is, for example, if I say, oh, I saw Shimon today, and I know you don't like Shimon, and you really don't. And if I say, hey, Mike, I saw Shimon today, oh, Shimon, boy, I can't stand that guy. Now, you spoke Lashon Hara. I got an assist. That's called avak Lashon Hara. That's avak Lashon Hara. You get an assist, right? It's called the dust of Lashon Hara. That, the Gemara says, another example would be, if you say to me, for me to bring up any name in public, to praise somebody, do you know that you're not allowed to excessively praise somebody? Because there's always somebody in a room who can't stand it. I said, oh yeah, Shimon, he's a great guy. He's unbelievable. So somebody's going to say, oh yeah, but he's got messy handwriting. Yeah, you got to find some flaw. Now, I'm guilty. I get an assist over there. You spoke Lashon Hara, I got the assist. That's called avak Lashon Hara. So the Gemara says everybody is guilty of avak Lashon Hara at some point or other. And everybody is guilty of. Now, watch this. Where is there an Avera that you could rebuke all of the Jewish people for? Avak Lashon Hara. Take a look at the first word of the Parsha. Eile hadvarim. Eile, what does it stand for? Aleph Lamed Hey. Avak Lashon Hara. The first word, avak Lashon Hara. El Kol Yisrael. That you can talk to Kol Yisrael about. That's avak Lashon Hara. Now, the word hadvarim can also be read in, there are no vowels in Torah. So the word hadvarim could be read as devorim. What are devorim? What's a devora? A bee. Elu hadvarim asher diber Moshe. Why? It's rebuke. What does a bee do? It stings. That's what people. Bees got a really bad rap, by the way. They do other things. There are bee accountants. There are bees that go to work every day. But they got a bad rap. They sting. They don't they produce honey or something? I never figure out how that one works or exactly what happens with the wax. I know exactly the whole thing. But at the end of the day, the bees sting. Rebuke stings. But then what happens to a bee after it stings? It dies. And that's the idea over here that Eila Hadvarim, that Moshe Rabbeinu, there's going to be some rebuke over here, but this is going to be right before Moshe Rabbeinu dies. That's the idea. That's the theme that we're talking about. Okay. Now, take a look at Pasuk Hey. Let's go on. Pasuk Dal, 940 top. When does Moshe do this? Acharei hakoso esichon melech ha'emori asher yoshev b'cheshbon ve'isog melech ha'bashan asher yoshev be'ashtaros be'edrei. This is after he defeated these two kings. That was the end of Parshas. Where was that? In the end of Parshas. Where was that? That was the end of Parshas Pinchas, where he defeats the two kings. Sichon and Og. That's the last thing that Moshe Rabbeinu did. He destroys Sichon and Og, and the Torah mentions that. Now, why does the Torah mention this now? This all takes place after he killed Sichon and Og. Now we know he killed Sichon and Og. Why is the Torah mentioning this now? Why is the Torah mentioning this? Anybody? We know this happened. We just read it 2 parshas ago, 3 parshas ago, whatever it was. Why is he saying this now? Because when you're going to rebuke somebody, they always want to know, what have you ever done for me that you're giving me rebuke? Now that's a very strange thing, isn't it? What have you done for me? What has Moshe Rabbeinu done for the Jewish people? Pulled them out of Egypt, pulled them out of, brought down the man, gave them the Torah, has been leading them for 40 years through a desert, yet there's always got to be, what have you done for me today? Right? Those of you who are sports fans, the same player you're cheering for, and you could have been cheering for him for years, all of a sudden you start booing him because he keeps striking out with the bases loaded. And get the bum out of here. There you go. But what second? I thought this was your favorite. Yeah, but what have you done for me today? Right? Isn't that true in life? And sometimes we take that with our nearest and our dearest. People who have helped us, parents, spouses, even children. Yeah, but what have you done for me today? You messed up one time. So what have you done for me today? Comes along Moshe Rabbeinu. The Torah says he waits until Moshe Rabbeinu rebukes them only after having done something that they could tangibly say, oh, he did us a favor. Now he killed Sichon and Og. Now they're more receptive. So what does he do? Be'ever hayarden be'eretz Moav, ho'il Moshe be'er es haTorah azos. Says Rashi, take a look at Pasuk Hey. It's the right column, 8 lines from the bottom. Ho'il, hischil, he starts clarifying the Torah. Kimo hinena ho'elti. Be'er es haTorah, he clarifies the Torah b'shivim lashon pirish lem in 70 different languages. Ooh, that's a job. He clarified the Torah in 70 languages. What does that mean? What does that mean? I'm not sure. You know, I don't even. I barely know 2. You know, I know a little bit of Yiddish. You know, took French in high school. Took French for 2 years. I gave it right back. And what do you call it? In 70 different languages. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but whatever it is that he did, why did he do it? Why is he clarifying? What's the message of clarifying the Torah in 70 different languages? What's the purpose? Whatever it means he did it, the Medrash says he did that. I don't know exactly how he did that.
Say they didn't understand.
No one could say they didn't understand. Well, he could have talked, they all understood Lashon HaKodesh at this point. What did he say again, your name is? Gilad, yes.
Maybe to spread Torah around to other people who didn't have the Torah and can understand it.
Good, very good. You're on the right track. In other words, first of all, we're going to be spread around. What about when we're in exile? What about when the Jews have been all over the place? The Torah is did you know that the Jews in Europe always spoke Yiddish? They didn't even understand the languages. They didn't know Russian. Jews were living in Russia. They didn't know Russian. They were in the Volozhin yeshiva closed because they wanted them to have to teach the Russian language. The Jews were allergic to the foreign languages, but it was taught in Yiddish. There's a woman's book called Sena Urena. It's a woman's commentary that was written in Yiddish for the women to be able to learn the Torah in Yiddish. In the Sephardi countries, the Torah in Ladino was the Sephardic version of Yiddish, was Ladino. And then you have South Africans. You know, they have the Torah, they have that language. So the Torah is in 70 languages, meaning that wherever you are, you will be able to learn Torah, exactly what you're saying, that number one. So that the Jews, wherever they are, they're going to be able to learn Torah. If you're they're Sfarim in French. They're Sfarim in Spanish. Every Jew has access. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, you know what? There's never going to be an excuse they can't learn Torah. And by the way, nowadays, where there's so much has been translated in English by the Art Scroll and there's so much, we don't have any excuses anymore. Used to be, a guy says, well, I can't learn Gemara, or I can't learn Mishnah because I don't understand Aramaic. It's all there in English now. It's all there. Nobody's got any excuses. To the degree that we have other things pulling us away, there's stuff on what do you call it, on technology. It's all accessible now. It's in 70 languages, means that Jews will never have an excuse not to learn Torah. Wherever we are, number one. Number two, there's this idea that you've probably heard that we're meant to be a light to the nations. You ever heard that idea? We're a light to the nations. To spread it to the Goyim. Okay, this is very, very confusing. People don't understand. How do we become a light to the nations? We don't become, the misconception is, we don't become a light to the nations by going out and teaching the nations. We're not trying to do outreach with the nations. To the contrary, if you've noticed, the nations are very focused on us. The nations, they notice us, right? Every other headline in the newspaper has to do with who's fighting now? Thailand and Cambodia are fighting right now. You know, how big of an issue is this really in the United Nations? Almost all of the, almost all of the Security Council of the United Nations, the percentage of rulings or whatever it is they call it, it always has to do with Israel. There's a lot of attention on Israel. Now, there's fighting in Africa, there's fighting in Cambodia, the Russians are fighting, who's the United Nations focused on? Israel. 25 countries got together and said, Israel has to stop the war in Gaza. How do you like that? They're watching us. They see us. They notice us. We're always under the microscope. How do we become a light to the nations is by behaving the way we're meant to behave and doing what we're meant to do. Then we're going to be seen and noticed. That's the 70 languages is telling you, wherever you are, this is what you were saying, wherever you are, you're going to be noticed. Study Torah, learn Torah, and you'll be a light to the nations in that way. That's how you will be a light to the nations. By doing what you have to do, not by going out, reaching out to the nations. If they come to ask us, so that we can teach them. But that's not our job to go out and worry about the world. Our job is to worry about ourselves, and the world will then be affected by the Jews living where we're supposed to live. Yeah.
So you're saying, you're talking about the translation of the Torah into 70 languages, but in the Mishnah and the Gemara, they talk about the fact that the translation of the Torah into, I think, Greek was a major problem, and that translation, in fact, of the Torah was something that was not desirable.
Right. So what's the question?
How do those two line up?
So over here, he's clarifying it. Over there, what they translated, what I understood is they wrote it in Greek. They wrote over the Torah that we have, the written Torah. They actually wrote it over in Greek, as opposed to translating it per se. That here's a translation. This is not a rewriting of the Torah. They're actually writing. That's my understanding is they're writing the Torah in Greek, and that made it accessible to people who had an agenda against the Torah.
Doesn't that make? I mean, it's the same.
But we don't have people who have a specific agenda against the Torah. In those days, there was an agenda against the Torah. There was actually a movement against an anti-Torah movement of the Torah itself, the Torah per se. Now there are people that are anti-religious. They're not anti the Torah to whatever it is they want to disprove the Torah. I don't think nowadays people are trying to disprove the Torah as much as they just don't want to have anything to do with the religion. Could be. I don't know. It's a good question. It's a good question. I think that at the time the problem was that there was a movement against Torah. I'll have to research it. It's a good question. It's a valid question, but that's my impression. Here, Moshe Rabbeinu is clarifying it for us, not that others should have access to it. He's clarifying the Torah for Klal Yisrael that we should always have access to the Torah.
You said that we should always have access and bring it to
Why did they translate the Torah there into Greek? That was Ptolemy was the one, or however you pronounce the name, Ptolemy. He was the one who told them to do it. Here, it's not that the Goy is telling them to do it. Moshe Rabbeinu says that we should have access. He wanted the access to the Torah. So now anybody's interested does have access to it, but the benefit is for us. I can't, if somebody's looking for a problem, you could always find a problem. There, he was specifically doing it in order to make trouble. That's why they changed some of their translations. There were certain things they didn't even translate accurately because they knew that he was trying to criticize the Torah. That's how I understand it. Okay. All right, guys, there's Rabbi Wiener is giving a talk now. Everybody else.